So for the last 2 years, pricing just didn't matter. I mean, it mattered in a sense of like you had to be within a range, but home sellers were just looking around at their neighbor's home to see what it would sell for. They were adding 5 or 10% onto that, and they were getting it in a matter of hours. So I think right now, what you really have to look at is what's under contract, what's selling, what's closed in the last 2 weeks to 30 days. Historically, we've always looked at what's sold in the last 4 to 6 months. For the last 21 years since I've been selling real estate, that's always been our barometer, right? 4 to 6 months, you look at all the data, you look at homes that are extremely comparable. Well, the problem with that now is 4 to 6 months might as well be a decade ago, right? It's changed, our market's shifted so rapidly. Things were selling so overvalued for that period of time that we just have to reset expectations on where things really should be. So if you think about it like a $500,000 home that was listed maybe in November of last year, it wasn't uncommon for that house to sell for $550,000, $560,000. And so now what does everybody see? What does every seller see? They see that $560,000 sale and they're like, oh, that's the number I want, right? When the house didn't start at $500,000. And I was actually reading a book the other day, and I'll share something with you. It's a real good illustration. This is actually out of a Tony Robbins book, nothing to do with real estate. Actually, it's a financial book on managing money and things like that. But this slide really got into a graph. It starts out with, you've got optimism when things are headed up, right? The way people feel emotionally about it is different than when it's headed down, when in reality, you're at the same mark. At the beginning, people have optimism because you're on an upward trajectory. And after that, it's excitement. The next phase is thrill. You get to euphoria when you're at the peak. Euphoria, that's where we were in October and November of last year when things were selling 10%, 20% above list price. There's crazy cash offers coming in, and you do 10, 20, 30 offers on a property depending on the price range that you're at. Now, here's probably where we're at right now. We're on a downward trend slightly, right? And this graph is a little over exaggerated. We're probably not gonna get down to the bottom in terms of like where it looks like we're at. There's always a bottom and there's always a peak. You know, where it's at, you know, and how drastic it is, we don't know until it's happened. But as you start to go down, you've got a little bit of anxiety, and I would tell you that that's probably where we're at right now. But what people are looking at is the rearview mirror, and they're looking at that euphoria state, and they're seeing the sellers that sold there, and they want that number, right? And I think you really have to understand where we're at on this graph and realistically where we're headed. So, you know, do we get to denial? Do we get to fear? Do we get to panic? Probably. Is it as drastic as this graph shows? No. Like if you went up and you could show a smaller bottom, I would suspect that that's probably where we're at. How quick do you come out of it? Nobody knows that. But I think understanding where we're at and anticipating where we might be headed is extremely important. So let me show you guys something a little bit differently. If you look at the market cycles, so I drew this out in terms of numbers to correlate the emotion. As we're up, a home that was priced at 500 went to 550. 550 was our new metric, and so that would be our new list price. The next seller would get 600, right? If you're that last seller that got 600 and you closed in November, December, January, now we're shifting a little bit and the market's going down a little bit. So the next seller might get 550. The next seller might get 525. The number is the same. The way you feel about that number is different. And the challenge right now, if you're a seller, is accepting where we're at in the market and knowing that we're not where we were 4 to 6 months ago. I don't think we're gonna drop much, but we have to be realistic that we might be in that anxiety phase, which is really the same as thrill. So it's interesting to see how emotions change when prices could really be the same as they were maybe in a different phase of this graph. The point is, if you're a seller right now, you really need to be paying attention to what's selling and where the market's headed. You need to be a little more strategic in your pricing approach than where we've had to be in the last 2 years. If you've sold a home with me or my team over the last 2 years, these aren't conversations that we've had to have, but it's really an important point to make, and probably one of the biggest topics that we need to discuss when selling a home now if you plan on being successful.